Hello, everyone, and welcome to another audience caller episode of The Real Stuff. Now, this today is a true audience episode. So we have 6 amazing people who wrote into us offering their stories and their perspectives on this topic, and I am so excited to share this cut with you. I've been personally thinking a lot about transitioning from 1 kid to 2 kids. I've been thinking about this a while. Obviously, I'm in my pregnancy, and I've basically been asking everyone I know who has more than 1 child what their experience was. Specifically, I'm curious how it compares to the journey they went on initially when they went from 0 kids to 1 kid. And when I asked my followers what they thought about this, I have to say I did receive a pretty even split of people saying 0 to 1 is harder, or people saying going from 1 to 2 is harder. It was pretty even when I asked my audience members to write in and email us if they wanted to come on the show and share their perspective. I would say I got about 50-50 in both directions. Some emails were long, elaborate stories, and I read through all of them. And I decided that on this episode, I was going to share 3 people with you who felt that 0 to 1 was the easier jump, and 3 people who felt that 1 to 2 was the easier jump. To make things easier for you as the listener so that you can easily follow along, we're going to first hear from all 3 of the people who said that going from 0 to 1 was the easier experience. And then after that, we'll hear from the people who said that adding their second 1 to 2 was easier. The main thing that I think I learned from reading people's responses and talking to so many people is that there are so many things that contribute to how you are going to personally feel about this topic and what your answer to this question is going to be. Everything from the differences between your pregnancy, the difference between your labor and delivery experience, how much help you have from your partner or how much outside help you have, maybe from a nanny or family, the health of your babies, what your living situation is at the time of becoming parents. Honestly, so much more. Everything is contingent on something else. But this said, even before I had these conversations, I came up with a theory about why I think some people feel that 0 to 1 is easier and others feel that that's harder. And after talking to all these people, I have to say, my theory holds true. It's not science, but it is a theory that seems to be proven time and time again. Meaning, I think that all 6 of these conversations confirm my theory. All this said, it's just a theory, but let me share it with you. My theory is that when people go from 0 to 1 kids, and that transition of going from having no kids to adding their first kid is difficult on them emotionally. Most often this is related to an identity loss or just like transitioning into being a parent from not being a parent. When people have a really, really hard experience of going from 0 to 1 because of that transition of just transforming into a parent, often those are the people who feel like adding the second kid is a breeze. And the reason for that is because they went through their hardest time and now they're so set in their role as either a mom or a dad that adding the second, they're just not feeling that same identity loss or that same emotional weight that they did the first time. So they naturally are going to say that going from 1 to 2 was easier. Whereas when people had such an easy experience of going from 0 to 1 and the transition of just becoming a parent was seamless and they didn't feel that identity loss and they didn't feel any sort of emotional way postpartum after their first, those are the people that are hit hard when they go from 1 to 2 and feel like 1 to 2 is harder because they tend to focus on the physical nature of how much more work it is to manage 2, which of course we all know it's just more work. You've added a second baby. So that's my theory. And as you listen to these cut downs and these conversations, you will hear how this theory is confirmed. But by all means, please, if you are listening in and you are contradicting to my theory and you have a personal story that is just not in line with this theory, please write in. We'd love to hear. I tried to pick people for this episode that had all different types of situations and circumstances, and I wanted people who just had different reasons for feeling the way they felt. So let's get started with our first caller. And once again, we're starting here with people who felt like going from 0 to 1 was easier than adding a second child.
When I was pregnant and I had friends that had 1 kid, they were like, oh, just you wait. And like, you get it, but you don't get it. And then once I had my first kid, I was like, oh, I get it. And now that a lot of my friends only have 1 kid still and I have 2, they'll be doing things with their kids, or they'll be out and about, or life still may be a little blissful for them, and I'm in the trenches with two, and I'm like, just wait.
So, your take on this whole 1 to 2 versus 0 to 1 is that going from 1 to 2 and now having 2 kids is harder and a lot more work than it was to have one. You gave me this whole list of all the things that are hard, and I want to kind of run through the list and just say the line items out loud and let you tell me about each category. Can we do that?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So, the first thing you said that was harder with 2 is just leaving the house in terms of scheduling things.
Just scheduling things, like, especially nap time when they're both napping or when only one is napping. Like, you try and have that routine, sometimes it doesn't always work out, or you'll try and make it home, or you don't want them falling asleep in the car. That's the hardest thing. But also getting out of the house in terms of, you'll have one dressed and then you'll turn around and the other one will be undressed. And you'll be like, "Oh my god." Or you'll have all the bags packed and then somebody has a blowout. It's just, there's always something that comes up. It's expect the unexpected.
Next thing you said was being out in public with 2 versus 1.
Yeah, this really affects me more than I thought it would. Especially now that my little one is walking. Like at the playground, one will want to go left and one will want to go right, and you can't be in two places at once. And I just feel so much more vulnerable now being out in public. Even just like, I used to just take my first daughter to the supermarket or to the mall or to every which way, and I felt like, either I was wearing her or I could hold her hand and I felt safe or okay. And now that I have two, if I'm out alone with them, I just feel so vulnerable. I just feel like I'm more of a target.
I'm already thinking about those moments of being out solo with 2 kids and especially the moment of getting them into or out of the car seats.
Yeah.
It's like your toddler kind of needs to stand, idly by while you deal with the baby.
Yeah.
And right now, when we're anywhere near a parking lot, it's like I've got hands on him, I have eyes on him, and that just seems a little scary.
Exactly.
Next thing was going out to eat as a family.
Yeah, that has not happened much now that we've had two. Our first daughter, it was like we could take her anywhere. I mean, we would always, whenever we would sit down, I would always order French fries first. That's like my trick, is just bring out the French fries right away. But now with two, it's, like you don't know which one's going to go off first. They're both a ticking time bomb. Which one's going to go off? Are you going to have to leave the table? Are you just going to have to leave completely and throw money on the table and run? It's not as enjoyable.
Is any of the fear about being out in public with them or being at a restaurant about judgment from other people, or is it purely the vulnerability?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm not taking them to places where I wouldn't want to see children myself, on like a Saturday night five-star dining restaurant in Manhattan. And I think definitely once you have kids, you have a lot of compassion for other mothers. Like if I see other women struggling in the store with a tantrum, I don't roll my eyes. We've all been there. It's more just, it's not as when they're both not sitting in their seats, or how am I supposed to even cut my meal or take a bite of my meal when this one's throwing that or this one needs that as well. It's not easy.
We should have talked about this earlier, but just so people are oriented, what's the age gap between your
They
kids?
are 25 months apart. So I have a daughter who's 3 and I have one who just turned like 14 months.
Moving down this list, you said another thing that makes it harder to have 2 is the mom guilt of not really being able to do the same things with your second that you got to
Yeah.
do with your first.
Like with the first, I was always at the library with her at free programs, free music classes, or even we would sign up for music classes and go. But now that there's that age gap, that she's 3, a lot of these classes are from like infant to 2. So there's a lot of things that my second one is missing out on, those music classes, those mommy and me classes, those library story times every so often as well. I mean, now it's even, to take them to a play place is now double the price. It used to be, all right, this isn't that expensive of a day to go to an indoor play and maybe grab a coffee and, maybe a snack there. But now it turns into, it's a whole different occasion going out now at 2.
You also mentioned the toll that having 2 takes on your relationship. I'd love to hear just about, in general, what changed and what some of the struggles maybe were going from 0 to 1, and then how that's amplified with 2.
Definitely you have your struggles when you go from 0 to 1, right? You're both new parents, you're trying to figure it out, you're trying to let them figure out how to be a parent as well. And then you slowly figure that all out and you get in your groove, and you have your fun weekends with your one child and you go away and you have fun days out and everything. And then when two kids come, you're, trying to get out of the house, and maybe I'm a little bit more stressed out to get out. It's definitely changed. It's just in terms of bedtime. By the time they do get to bed, we're both shot. We're not communicating like we used to. We're spending the same amount of time on the couch as we used to before bed. A lot of times now there'll be one in the bed with us, which I tried to hold out as long as I could, but it's inevitable sometimes that there's a kid in your bed. You definitely are shorter with one another. Definitely in the heat of the moment when both are screaming and both kids need something and you're both trying to get it for them. It's very easy just to snap. And you really have to step back and realize that you are not fighting with each other. There's a bigger common problem. And not only just my relationship with my partner, but I said even in my letter, just our relationships with our friends.
Mm.
Like now that there's two, one is more liable to be sick. So those birthday parties and those plans are more likely to be canceled. So there was a lot of times this winter where we had to not see friends or cancel plans because who has a cold or who's sick at this one. So
Yeah, that's something I didn't think about. And you also talked about your relationship to yourself or just your general sense of self-care and wellness and how that's diminished since adding a second.
definitely. I mean, there'll be times where I'll be packing up to get out of the house and we'll be at the playground or we'll be wherever we have to be and I'll realize I didn't even bring a water bottle for myself. And then you're taking sips out of your toddler's backwash.
And I'm assuming that's not even to mention just having way less time to
Yes,
do
I
anything
know.
personal.
That nice skincare routine happens few and far between sometimes. At the end of the night, when I'm struggling to get one to bed, I mean, when in the trenches, when I had the two little ones, it was really, you were lucky if I brushed my teeth some days. I was like,
Mm.
just struggling for sure.
So, a lot of people listening who hear people's opinion on this topic about which transition is harder, they like to kind of understand as many details about your situation as possible so that they can sort of put themselves in your shoes. So, in your case, you told us the age gap between your kids, but can you talk a little bit about, in terms of your partner working, how often you said he has to commute in and what that means for
Hmm.
you as a stay at home mom?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky I get to stay home with them, which I think also adds to my experience. I think some of my friends who work don't struggle as much because they're at work all week and then they may be enjoying the weekend home with their toddler a little bit more because they haven't seen them. They've just been out of the house for 50 hours all week, whereas I don't really get that break. And in terms of my partner, he works in construction in Manhattan. It's usually 6 days a week. He works nights, which is really hard because when we're trying to get them down for bed and, after dinner's happened and everything, that's when, daddy gets to leave.
So, he's home during the day with you?
Mhm. Primarily sleeping, which is also trying to keep them quiet or out of the house so
Oh,
that
that's really hard.
he can sleep. I feel like there's a lot of times where we're not parenting together. We're almost like ships passing in the night. I'm parenting. He'll be with them while I run and go to the supermarket or do my errands, and then he's parenting alone. So I feel like there's a lot of times where we're parallel parenting and not so much just together. So it's hard. It's hard when you're a stay-at-home mom and, your spouse is working 60, 70, 80 hours a week.
Just so we all know, was your choice to be a stay-at-home mom, was that more so out of a choice and a desire to stop working and to do that? Or was it more like from a financial perspective, it made most sense? What's your
No, it
reasoning for
was
that?
definitely I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom,
Okay.
definitely. Yes, I was not totally in love with my career. I'm very happy to stay home with them. I'm blessed. I love it. I can't wait to go back to work one day. There's many a mornings I miss sitting in my office with a hot cup of coffee and talking to adults and not listening to Miss Rachel. And there's a lot of, I foster a lot of mom guilt of I have to rely on screens, like she's not just going to play independently every night. So there is a lot of screen time before bed, or there is a lot of nights where she falls asleep watching something instead of reading the books like I wish I could because I'm trying to get the little one to bed. And then once you finally get the little one to bed, the attitude of my older one or the tantrums can just come at any moment and then she'll wake that one up and then you start all over again. So it's a lot of letting go. A lot of the things that you said you would never do or you thought you never did, it all goes out the window.
And I guess your real biggest reason for feeling like going to two was so difficult was as you put it, I think in your letter, it's like adding on more weight at the gym.
Literally.
Like it's just more physical weight.
Literally, right? You start off at the gym, you start off at a weight, and it's hard, but over time, you get used to that weight, right? And it gets easier. So it's time to add more weight, and that's hard. And I think over time, it gets easier for sure. Even, in the 14 months that I've had two now, it has gotten easier. Um, but it's hard for sure. If I was to add a third kid, God so help me, I couldn't even imagine.
Well, I hear you. I really appreciate you sharing this perspective. This was insightful, and it looks like I gotta put in some reps in the gym before the second one comes. I really appreciated how honest Sam was about all the challenges that she's faced so far. And as you can see, this guest was definitely fitting with my theory where it seemed like her reasons for feeling like 1 to 2 was harder mostly revolved around those physical tasks. She actually talks about it being just like adding more weight at the gym. Okay, let's move on to our next guest who agreed that having your first kid is easier than adding a second. There are some stories that my dad tells our family on repeat because we just never get tired of hearing them. So we've got the Woodstock stories, the Studio 54 days, endless interview stories with rock and roll stars, and of course, the personal stories about meeting our mom in middle school and all that good stuff. So, of course, I know the perfect gift that will capture all of my dad's stories for our family forever, and that is StoryWorth. StoryWorth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your dad or a father figure in your life for years to come. And here's how it works. Every week, StoryWorth will email your loved one with a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick. Things like, what is a lesson that your parents taught you that stuck with you, or what's something you're most proud of in your life? All your loved one needs to do is reply to the email with a story. It could be long, short, it doesn't matter. However much time they have, they'll answer the question. And you as the gift giver are emailed a copy of your loved one's responses as they're submitted over the course of the year. And then after that year is over, StoryWorth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you can then share and revisit for generations to come. Michael and I gifted StoryWorth to his grandpa a few years back before he passed, and that hardcover book of his life stories is so special to us, and we got a copy printed for all of the cousins. StoryWorth has more than 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot, with millions of stories preserved since they were founded over 10 years ago. So this Father's Day, give the fathers or the father figures in your life such a unique and heartfelt gift that you will all cherish for years to come. Right now, save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/realstuff. That's storyworth.com/realstuff to get $10 off your first purchase. All right, Lindsay, welcome to the Real Stuff. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So just so everyone knows, Lindsay wrote this essay to apply for this episode. And at the very end, I just want to read the PS. I'm not going to read the essay because the essay will give away what we're going to talk about. PS. This was my first version that I thought got deleted after my baby projectile vomited on me and my phone dropped. Tried to rewrite, send it, and then found this gem hidden in the drafts. So clearly there was a lot going on in your world.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I sent that email at like 3 a.m. when I was nursing.
Well, you're here. We loved your letter.
Thank you.
And Lindsay's one of our callers who feels that going from 1 to 2 kids was a lot harder than your initial transition from 0 to 1. So I'm just going to let you talk about your experience and why you feel that way. And then I have some questions.
Okay, cool. I just personally feel like going from 1 to 2 was harder because you have a toddler running around, which I'm sure is what a lot of people first kind of notice is, with the first baby. I know it sounds cliche, and I said this in my letter, but I really did sleep when the baby slept, if I could, or I had me time, or I showered, and I was really blessed that our first kid, Lucie, actually spelled the same way you spell
Oh, I
yours,
love that.
which is how I found you online.
That's so
She was a
special.
great sleeper, so I had a lot of time of like she could be put down and I could sleep or do laundry or dishes or whatever. But with the second kid, not that she's not a good sleeper, but I'm baby wearing her all the time, or I'm baby wearing and I'm, bending over to do things with the kid or make dinner or anything that you do with a toddler. So I had a lot less free time that I did with my first kid. I also felt like from the 0 to 1 growing up, I was always babysitting, and I had a lot of experience with all my nibblings, all my nieces and nephews. So
Oh, I've never heard that. I love that.
yeah, it got hard when we had all nephews and then we went to nieces, and saying nieces and nephews is a lot. So nibblings would be the gender neutral. I just felt like I had a lot of experience with kids, and I am also very thankful that I have a great community around me. So I had people to help with my first. I had friends coming over to help with laundry, give me time to nap with my first. But then you go from 1 to 2, and nothing against anyone that's helped me. Everyone's amazing, but everyone kind of feels like, oh, you did it before. You've done this. You got it. No more baby showers, no more welcoming home. Not that you need more gifts, but like it's business as usual, but you're thrown into this whirlwind of having another newborn with a toddler. So it felt like a lot going from 1 to 2 versus 0 to 1.
So it kind of sounds to me a lot of your reasons and a lot of the things that made 0 to 1 easier for you, I would classify as physical things, the ability to sleep, the physical hands-on help. Going from 1 to 2, you're talking about baby wearing while trying to manage a toddler. Can we talk a little bit about the emotional side of going from 0 to 1 versus maybe any differences that you felt once you already had one and you added a second?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, I felt like 0 to 1, at least for the first month, I was honestly on a high. Like I felt like I was just so excited. I wanted, if anyone that knows me watching this, like I've always wanted to be a mom, always wanted to have kids. It's like been my life goal. So I literally felt like I was on this adrenaline rush for the first 3 to 4 weeks. It kept me going through the hardest part of no sleep. And then, like I said, my daughter, she slept well. So mentally I was able to like get some of my sanity back because I wasn't super sleep deprived pretty much at all with my first babe. And I know that's rare, but with the second, you don't have that. You don't have a second to fill your own cup because you're constantly filling others. That first month or two, mentally, I just felt like I was being stretched so thin. And as much as like my partner and my family all tried to help, it's just so hard and exhausting and draining.
So when you went from 0 to 1, being, in an entire month of feeling on a high, I'm assuming you wouldn't classify yourself as having gone through, well, definitely not postpartum depression, but what about any of the standard just baby blues post-delivery?
I definitely had like postpartum anxiety with both, more so with my first, that I would wake up. I just would constantly have this reoccurring nightmare, I guess, because you're not really ever in a deep sleep that first month or two. So I would jolt awake thinking that my kid was in the bed with me and that I was like rolling on top of them or they couldn't breathe, even though
Yeah, such a
she never.
common
Yeah,
fear.
we didn't co-sleep. Not that anything's wrong with that. I just my anxiety was so high that I would wake up thinking she was, but she was in the bassinet next to me. But with the second, we're in the middle right now of moving to a new house, and it's just so stressful. And we're renovating. I'm sure know because you have renovated. So we don't have another room in our current house. So our baby had to sleep next to me for longer than Lucie did. And that's been really, really, really hard because I'm waking up at every noise.
Yes, and the noises are incessant.
It's extreme. It's extreme.
And what about in those early days with your first? It sounds like because you had all these nibblings, as you said, and you've always been around kids and always knew you wanted a baby. Did you feel any sense of identity loss or any negative feelings associated with becoming a parent? Or was it really just an incredible positive transition for you, which is amazing if that's the case?
I do think that, and I don't know if it's because I manifested it having wanted this so badly my whole life, but I don't feel like I lost a sense of myself. I'm a teacher, and so I kind of think that it naturally went from like what I do for a job, kind of my caretaker personality, to doing this for a child. Although I will say it was hard relate on our relationship just because you're both not sleeping. Mothers tend to be a default parent, not always, but I definitely felt defaulty. And same thing with the second kid, definitely default parent. But it's so hard not to keep score and to realize you're on the same team. So I keep having to remind myself that we're a partnership and we do this together.
Speaking of your relationship and a partnership, can you talk to me a little bit about, I know you wrote it in your application, a little bit about the differences between the dynamic that sort of just ensued with you and your partner after you had your first, and then how that changed, I guess, for the worse once your second came along and you guys really had to divide.
Yeah. With the first, I had a C-section. My partner, he was fantastic in terms of helping out those first few weeks. I had some complications, so it was a really awful recovery in terms of physically being able to move. But I still feel like we were partners in it because if I had the baby, he could go do something that filled his cup, whether it was play tennis or hockey or go to work. And then when he had the baby, he only had to worry about that one child. And usually it would be sleeping, was how I would time up my leaving just to make it easier. And then I could go do something, whether it was see friends or go for a bike ride or something that filled my cup.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to two, you're tag teaming. And so I just feel like, again, going back to feeling a little bit defaulty, is I would have both kids and be unable to really hand off both kids because he might not feel comfortable yet with two kids, whereas I just have to take on, because it's just, you just do it as a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so we weren't able to tag team one-on-one. If you have two kids, it makes it hard doing anything. So I now have the infant and he has the 2-year-old, and we just split up and never really get to fill our own cups. So that's been the hardest part.
There was another line in your application that I loved. You said something like, my husband and I have gone now from being roommates to basically being savages in a high school cafeteria, Mean Girls style.
Yeah.
By that, do you sort of mean that your actual relationship has taken a hit?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just been hard to feel like you can be lovey-dovey because, like I mentioned earlier about keeping score and how you don't want to do it, but it still builds resentment, I think, over time.
Mm-hmm.
I say that communication is definitely the key, and that's how you work through things. I'm still figuring that out because by the time I want to communicate, I'm still angry and I don't know how to balance letting it go. I should note my husband also works nights and weekends, so
Oh wow, that's
it's
really
hard. It's hard when we have kind of opposite shifts.
You spoke a little bit about what it felt like to go out of the house and leave the house with two.
Well, comparing it to one, I feel like when I went out with our first daughter, Lucie, especially when she was little, like an infant, she slept through all of it. And so she would sleep, we'd go out. It was great. I felt like the cool parents who, and again, maybe because I had the experience with kids, but she would sleep, we'd walk her around. We live at a cool place where there's a lot of walkable streets with, drinking and eating, and it was great. But with the second, you're managing your toddler's expectations, and eating out with a toddler, which your kid is now a toddler. It's not relaxing. It's not, I wouldn't say the word fun comes to mind when I think about eating out with a toddler, because you're eating quickly so that and there's so many memes about it, right? Like one parent scarfs their food down so they can handle the toddler, right? So then now you have a toddler and you have an infant who may or may not sleep through all the noise. And so you're kind of almost just rushing to get your meal done rather than I'd rather just order in and eat in our house. And then not that I want our lives to revolve around a toddler schedule. If she's going to bed at 7, she's not going to be fun after 7. So that's not fun for anyone.
So you got to have a very early dinner.
Exactly. We tend to go out at 4:35 if we're going to go. I'd make sure that the baby is fully fed before we leave. I have no issue nursing in public, but there's still a mental piece of that to make sure that you're, aware of your surroundings and what's going on. And we don't do it often, but I would be at the table with the baby trying to get her to sleep through dinner, and my husband would be walking Lucie around the restaurant to keep her entertained until dinner came. We'd eat quick and then we'd go. When we order our drinks, we order chicken fingers and fries because we know it needs to cool down so that she can eat while we're ordering.
One of the major takeaways I'm also getting from you and some others is just the whole concept of how when you have one and you pass that one off to your partner, you really get some you time. Although Michael and I are often together doing things together, we do frequently split up, and one of us will go play tennis while the other's with Milo. One of us will go do something else. It is a little alarming that once you have two, it's like, when do you get to recharge? When do you get to catch up on your personal life? And it sounds like a lot of your reasonings are tied back to exhaustion and physical time and physical labor. And it is a very valid and interesting perspective. So thank you so much for writing in
welcome.
And for being on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Lindsay's experience was very fitting with my theory because here's a person whose first month with her first baby was just newborn bliss. She said she felt like she was on a high. Even despite having some postpartum anxiety, she did not seem to have that sense of identity loss that some other people feel. So lastly, we're going to move on to our third caller who felt like 0 to 1 was easier. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lucie.
I understand you have 2 boys. First one was January 2020, second, August 2022. You wrote to me telling me that 0 to 1 was pretty seamless for you, and that actually when you had 1 to 2, it was just as seamless until your transition back to work.
Yes.
Can you first just talk a little bit about 0 to 1? And when you say it was seamless, I'm so curious what your postpartum experience was like with that first.
Yep. So since we'll talk about work when we get to the second one, I'll just give a background that prior to having kids, I worked full-time in person in an office. I actually work as a research scientist. So my job, there are little things that could be done from home, like administrative, but the bulk of my work needs to be done in person. After having my first son, I had 14 weeks of maternity leave from my company, all paid. So I was very grateful for that. And it just felt natural when he was born. My transition to becoming a mother and bringing a baby home just felt like that's what was supposed to happen. I never felt overly tired with those first sleepless nights. It just felt natural. My husband took a month off of work, and that was late January to late February 2020. So we were just loving life, this new little family. I loved having the winter baby because we just were cozy and home all the time. And then my husband went back to work for about 3 weeks before the pandemic kind of shut everything down.
When you say I'm just so fascinated by not being super exhausted. Did you guys have any sort of help, or were you really just thriving in that new mom moment?
Yeah, we didn't have any help with the nights or anything. My parents live around the corner, so we have their help physically and emotionally in those early times. But yeah, everything truly felt seamless.
So it must have been a no-brainer for you. Sounds like you got pregnant with your second when your first was just over a year. Is that right?
I found out I was pregnant when my first was 22 months. So
Okay.
they're almost exactly 2.5 years apart.
Can you talk about what you wrote about in your application about this routine that you got into during your leave and how you really feel like you did have time postpartum to do some self-care activities and, talk with friends, exercise, all of that?
Yep. So I ended up having 5 months of leave for my second son. And again, my baby was fairly low needs. He wasn't fussy. He was very go with the flow. So with my second, I was feeling more comfortable about taking the baby, and he just felt like a little buddy who just got to come along with my life. I would just go about my day. I'd run errands. He'd come with me. I'd go to lunch. He'd come with me. But then I got into a routine too of Monday mornings in his first nap, I would exercise. And Thursdays were the day I would spend with my mom, and we would hang out at her house and scrapbook or run errands.
Oh, that's so
whatever.
sweet.
Yeah. It was the best. So I just loved being able to do all the errand kind of things, and then also the house care during the day and just fitting that in around my baby's schedule. It just felt like I could live my life of all the things I needed to do at home personally, and my baby was just kind of along for it.
So just so people can understand the difference between what you're about to get into, which is going back to work after your second, what did going back to work, if anything, look like after your first?
Yeah. So going back to work after my first son was born was not at all what I expected it would be because of the pandemic. I ended up not going back to the office until my son was 6 months old because it was April, May, June 2020. So when I went back to work in July, I still worked from home 1 or 2 days a week, and my son was home with me on those days. And like I said, I can do some administrative work from home, but the bulk of my job needs to be in person. So those work from home days were pretty light on the work. So my entry back to work was very gradual. I went from maternity leave to 5 days a week work from home, light work, to 3 to 4 days on site. And then when my son was 16 months old is when I went back to work on site 5 days a week. So It was extremely gradual, and I felt like I had time on those work from home days to, throw in some laundry and spend time with my son just because of the nature of my work.
Got it. And now with your second, you actually have a longer maternity leave at home and you get into this great rhythm of kind of being a stay-at-home mom during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're thrown back into 5 days of work, 5 days at the office, a 35 plus hour work week.
Yep.
So what did that feel like?
So the first day back felt kind of fun. I was like, oh, I'm seeing my friends. People are happy to see me. Like, this is fun. And then I got home. I think it was a Tuesday. And I got home and I thought, I have to do this again tomorrow. Like,
Mm.
oh my gosh. I was so sad and overwhelmed. I just sat at my desk in the lab and like cried every morning. I mostly just missed my baby. And then when I was home, it was fitting in all of the activities that I did all day to just this evening period while also trying to spend time with my toddler and husband. And then I felt like it also put pressure on the weekends to get things done. When again, we're kind of, we call ourselves now like a core four family. Like we just want to do everything together. We don't want to do this like divide and conquer. We like being together and spending time together. So I was really sad internally, but I'm, for better or for worse, I was good at hiding that. Like if you asked anybody at work, they wouldn't have known that something was wrong. Like I was still going through my day, doing my job, showing up to work and succeeding at work. But inside, I was just so profoundly sad.
I love the core four mentality. I have to take that for myself. So it's probably kind of going to be impossible for you to do this next exercise with me because I'm going to ask you to like strip a lot of things out of your mind. But your first experience was totally, I don't know if tainted is the word, by COVID, but
Mm-hmm.
colored by COVID. And you kind of can't imagine having gone through that first experience without all the restrictions that were in place and just the way it felt to have the work from home mandate and all of that. And your second experience has kind of been colored by this transition back to the office that you disliked. And I know we didn't even really get into it here, but do you want to just quickly explain how you remedied that situation?
Sure. So after 4 months, I just wasn't feeling better. And it also, as time went on, it added in the overwhelmed feeling just kind of kept building along with the sadness. So I just thought this isn't tenable. Something needs to change. And everybody I talked to said, well, why don't you go part time? And there's nobody I know of in my department who's part time. So I hate drawing attention to myself. So I didn't want to kind of, I don't know, make a big deal out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, what's the harm in asking? The worst case scenario is that I ask, they say no, and this stays the same. I was also nervous because my manager is a male who's married, but he doesn't have children, doesn't plan to have children. So he's compassionate, but I've always kind of hesitated on how much he can't put himself in my shoes.
Right.
So I ended up like drafting this whole Word document, and it ended up being a virtual call with him, which was good because I would get so emotional anytime I would talk about this. And I just told him, I'm showing up to work, but I still am carrying the sadness with me. And could I transition to a 4-day schedule? And he was so supportive. And he even said, is that too much? Do you want to do 3 days a week? And I said, no, let's try 4. So really, I think starting the next week, I was working 4 days on site and then 1 day not working at all. And that day is now Mondays. And I decided to keep my younger son home with me. And we spend our Mondays, we go to the library, story time, and then we will sometimes run errands. And then while he naps, I fold laundry and meal prep. And I'm just like, let me get it all in 2.5 hours. And I just feel like it being Monday too, it just sets me up for the week feeling much more ready to tackle the week of being out of the house and in a good spot with meal preps and laundry. And it has helped a ton.
Amazing. So going back to my question there, about if you could kind of strip away some of the factors that colored these experiences. I think some people listening might hear your story and say, well, this isn't necessarily a tale of 0 to 1 kids versus 1 to 2 kids and what's harder, so much as it is a tale of your work situation being harder the second time, which has then caused your transition from 1 to 2 kids to feel more difficult. Correct me if anything I'm saying is wrong. But I'm kind of curious if you could imagine the work situations almost being flipped, or if you could imagine the work situations being equal. Do you have anything else or any other thoughts or feelings about just how the actual transition was of going from 0 to 1 versus 1 to 2, and what that did to you, what that did to your family, your relationship, emotionally, physically, which experience you felt like was more difficult or more easy, kind of taking out all the work factors?
I think I would still say the transition from 1 to 2 was more difficult. Also, having my older son and not having the time to spend with him that I was used to after having the second child. My husband's and my relationship, it definitely changed after the first child was born, but not in a bad way. It just, your focus changes, your priorities change, we spend a lot more time communicating about logistics as opposed to how was your day or something like that. So I think that kind of maintained after each child was born. But I think me feeling like I was pulled in more directions with the second child made that more difficult. But I will say that having a supportive partner was so crucial for that transition. It was a lot to juggle, and it still is. But
And what about mentally? When you say that your first experience was seamless, did you go through any of those baby blues or postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, any emotional feelings around becoming a mom, or was that experience of going from 0 to 1 really just a joy for you, which would be awesome?
yeah, I would say it really was just a joy. And I think I tend to be pretty emotional, so I kept waiting for it, and I kept thinking, is this the baby blues, or is it going to start now? And I really just felt joy after both of them were born. When I tell people that, I always want to add that I had an uncomplicated pregnancy, uncomplicated delivery, and uncomplicated children. So I think that contributes. Not to say if that's the same for you that you can't have baby blues or postpartum depression, but it just allowed me to ease in to this change seamlessly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more, you know, to your point of you having an uncomplicated everything and it leading to that, I'm really learning throughout these conversations that it is kind of a gamble of how your postpartum experience is going to feel, no matter what type of pregnancy you had or what type of labor and delivery. But this conversation was incredibly insightful. And as the people who are listening will start understanding, this conversation is fitting with my theory that I think I probably already shared on this episode if you're listening. If not, you'll hear it later. But I do have a theory about the people who feel like 1 to 2 is easier versus 0 to 1. And your answer is fitting with my theory.
Oh, okay.
So thank you for coming on, Laura. This was great. And good
Awesome.
luck with your 2 little boys.
Thank you, Lucie, and congratulations on your second pregnancy. I love following
Thank you.
to see what comes.
Thank you. It's going great. Now, Laura was another caller who said 0 to 1 was just a joy for her. If you are asking yourself, is this the baby blues? You clearly are not having them. So once again, it's just another caller who fits with my theory of when people didn't feel that sense of identity loss or baby blues after baby 1, then they feel like adding the second was harder. Also, this conversation just goes to show how important your life circumstances after you bring a baby home. So in the second case scenario, a shitty back to work situation contributed to her feeling like adding the second child was much harder and that it was just a worse experience. So definitely make sure as you're listening to these conversations that you remember how unique everyone's life situation is. Okay, let's pivot onto the 3 callers now who have the opposite point of view and say that going from 0 to 1 was harder than adding their second child. I'm excited that we have some international callers for this one. So let's get started with a guest from Colombia. Welcome to The Real Stuff, Camila. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you for your application. And I have to say, your letter and everything you wrote in it, I felt like I was reading my own words. I was like, we had the same experience. And your first was born in December 2021, just 1 month after my son, same year. And it sounds like we had a very similar postpartum experience. However, you did get pregnant a lot faster than I did for your second. So
Yes.
let's hear your take on which transition, whether it's 0 to 1 or 1 to 2, was the hardest, and just tell us your story.
For me, just to start, it was harder from 0 to 1 than from 1 to 2. Just because the change in your life is so big. You go from having all the freedom you want, going out whenever you want, going on vacations whenever you want, to being more in the house, in charge of a little human being after postpartum. You go through like the blues. You call it like the blue stage for 1 month, and I only cried for that month. Like from 5 to 6, it was my worst hour yet.
Every night when the sun was going down.
Yeah, it was
Yes.
horrible. Oh, it was horrible. I just started crying. So that for me was hard, like the postpartum part of going from 0 to 1. And then you adjust. But for me, the adjustment just lasted 6 months because I found out I was pregnant with my second baby girl. We always wanted 2 kids, but she arrived a little bit earlier than expected.
Very early.
Yeah, for me it was really early, but at the end everything worked out perfectly. That first month I felt terribly, um, like I felt a lot of guilt, feeling so anxious and sad that I was pregnant so soon, because I was just starting to get like the hang of it. I was starting to know my baby. I was starting to know the rhythm with my husband as well. And finding out about her, it was like a shock. It was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do this. But after a while, my husband was my rock. From the moment I told him I was pregnant, he was, we can do this. We always wanted to. We are a good team. We can do it. You have me all the way through, so don't worry. And that gave me a little bit of peace. I was like, okay, it's true, I'm not alone. That month, 2 months probably, were the worst, like for me, in adjusting from 1 to 2, and she was not here. This was just getting to the idea that I was going to have 2.
So
But
just
after
during
she
your
arrived-
pregnancy.
Yeah, just during my pregnancy.
Got it.
After she arrived, it was, for me, it was a breeze. I already knew what to do. I wasn't constantly checking if she was breathing, because I already went with that through with my first. So I was sleeping more. I knew that when she slept, I could sleep.
Right.
And then when she arrived, my husband took care of the toddler. It was his job to be with him because I was feeding and being with the newborn all the time. So it was like having, again, only one for periods of the day. And yeah, I felt like after she was 4 months old, we could go out. I was more relaxed with that, because here in Colombia, you're told you cannot go out before they turn 2 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because of the vaccines. So I took that really like hard with my first one. And I stayed in, and that was also, that didn't help with my mental health.
Right.
I was like, no, I have to go out. I have to. So with my second, 2 weeks later, I went to the park. My toddler didn't understand that much what was happening. He was too small. He was 1 year and 3 months. So we kept his routine really basic, and what he did all day long, he kept doing it. So his life didn't change that much. Today, they're really good friends. They kick and punch each other. But that's normal. I have a 2-year-old now and a 1-year-old. So they're starting like to play together. You see them laugh together. So that makes all the sense in the world now that we had her at the period of time that we did.
And can you talk a little bit about just when you went into having that first baby, from a, I guess, knowledge standpoint about how a baby was going to change your life, I think when a lot of people have siblings around them that have had kids, or they know a lot of friends with kids already, they're sort of teed up for what's coming versus being kind of on the early side and having a big shock and not realizing how much your life is going to change and just feeling this emotional identity loss. Can you talk about
Mhm.
how you felt when you first came home from the hospital?
Yes, I was one of the first of my friends to have a baby. So I was, in that sense, I was a little bit alone. I had one previous friend that had a baby just 2 weeks before me. So we were just like in the same stage.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know what we were doing. So when I came home, it was December 27th. I came home December 28th, 29. Everyone was in holidays, out on vacation. My parents were here, fortunately, and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law were here as well. But it arrived December 31st, and that was the day that I said, "What did I do?"
I can
For the first
relate.
time. Yeah, what is happening? Because it was. I'm usually used to staying up late that on that day, especially, and that was obviously not going to happen. So my family was gathering elsewhere. I was just here with my husband and my newborn. So it was really lonely that day for me, even though
Mm-hmm.
I was with both of the loves of my life. But it was lonely. I was saying, like, what did I do? What is this? But then as time goes by, it changed. But that moment, I remember precisely, I was sleeping in my bed and I was saying, I don't want to be here right now. I want to sleep. That was my first thought. I want to go to bed, and I feel guilty about that because I had just my very first baby, beautiful baby, and he's awesome. But that really happens.
I think that holiday time is a particularly difficult time to bring home a new baby, and Milo came 4 days before Thanksgiving. I think part of the reason it's so hard is because I've always wanted a baby and I've always kind of envisioned what the holidays would be like with a baby, especially when you go to a family gathering and maybe you have cousins that have a baby or you see other people with a baby. Your experience of being there as a guest and hanging out with someone else's baby is just night and day from what it feels like when it's your own baby.
Yeah.
And that first Thanksgiving, I was so excited he came before Thanksgiving because he was actually due December 12th. And then I went into
Mhm.
labor November 20th. And here he was, November 21st. And I'm so excited. I have his first Thanksgiving is coming up. Yet that holiday felt absolutely nothing like what I envisioned it would feel. Of course, I was
Yeah.
still healing from labor, postpartum hormones all over the place. I'm nursing. It was a kind of a weird time, as you probably remember, with
Yeah.
one of the COVID varieties coming back.
Mhm.
So it was like, we're going to this family gathering. Has everyone tested for COVID? Are people wearing a mask and holding the baby? Just a lot of stress around that holiday experience when you have such a high expectation. And I almost wonder if they had been born in a different time of year when it was just a little bit
More
less
regular.
expectations of what is going to be
Mhm.
like for you, maybe the reality wouldn't have felt quite as grim and dark in that moment.
I agree 100%. 100%. Because you imagine the baby, when you imagine holidays with a baby, you imagine him or her being bigger, like older. So crawling around or walking or enjoying the gifts and everything. But you have a newborn. They
Yeah.
only sleep, eat, poop, repeat.
Yep.
So you are not in the gathering. You're like
Yeah.
apart.
You're isolated
Uh-huh.
emotionally and probably
And
physically.
physically, yeah.
One of our other callers who's going to be part of this episode who agrees with you that going from 1 to 2 was easier. Her age gap between her kids was almost 7 years. And so
Mhm.
to hear you talk about this, 1 year age gap and still feeling like it was easy, that's something I find fascinating because it kind of is proof that even if you have kids close together, your experience can still be better for the second one, even though when this second baby comes, you still have another baby that you're taking care of it. They're not an independent toddler or a kid yet. Is that how you felt?
Yes, I felt that way. I felt that support is the most important thing. So having a spouse that is there for you, that is involved, that has your back, every day, all day, it's really important. So from the first day she arrived, it was like a mutual unspoken agreement that he was going to be with our toddler. And I felt guilty at the same time not being with him. But then I realized right now, the one that needs me the most is her, to be fed and to be with her most of the time. And that was like okay at the beginning. Then as we progressed in time and we learned, I also learned to delegate the baby when she was not sleeping or eating, so I could be with my toddler. Because one thing that they never tell you, or it's what happened to me, was the guilt that I had bringing home the second baby, because I was taking that first place and that attention away from the toddler. And my toddler wasn't a toddler at all at that point. He was too young. So both my spouse and we felt guilty for him. But then uh, we saw the relationship we have with our siblings, and then we realized we are giving him a really a great gift, to have that relationship in his life.
It sounds like with your second, it's almost like you got to have the experience of having one newborn baby again, but this time you just felt equipped. Your life had already settled into the rhythm that you were in, so you didn't have that emotional identity loss and major shift and change when that baby came. And that's why it seemed easier for you.
Yeah, it seemed easier. I was also more relaxed. I was more chill about it. I also thought about myself. So if I needed to go out, I would tell my husband I need to go out with a friend. I need to go out and vent, and he also understood. With my first one, I was like really attached. So for me to go out, it was hard at the beginning.
Yes.
But with the second one, I was, yeah, you know what? We'll go with the flow. We know what we're doing. We already did it once, so it's gonna be okay.
Well, Camila, it really sounds like you are the Colombian version of me here on the East Coast of the US, and I'm holding out hope that my experience of my second is just like yours. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. I'm sure people are going to really resonate with your story.
Thank you.
I said it in that interview with Camila, but our first postpartum experiences sounded eerily similar. So I really am hoping that I feel similarly to how she felt adding the second. But definitely this caller fits with my theory. I hate to say it. Okay, the next guest who also thought 0 to 1 was harder. Let's get into it. Father's Day time always feels to me like the real start of summer. And if you've been racking your brain to find the perfect gift for your dad or a father figure in your life, and if they are a true foodie, I highly recommend going with Omaha Steaks. This Father's Day, you can get gift packages from Omaha Steaks starting at just $99. And as a bonus, you can use the promo code all caps Lucie to get $10 off your order. Omaha Steaks has absolutely perfected way more than just steak. So we also order chicken from them, seafood, you can also get wine, tons of possibilities. Every entree is flash frozen, vacuum sealed, and ready to prepare whenever dad wants to grill. And it's all backed by their 100% money back guarantee. It really is the perfect gift for someone for the start of summer when we're all going to have lots of outdoor time ahead of us. Go to omahasteaks.com, use the promo code Lucie to get $10 off your order. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code Lucie, all caps, at checkout for $10 off gift packages starting at $99. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. Tash?
Yes, yeah. Tash.
Okay, Tash. Well, I read your submission and it truly brought me a lot of joy to hear that someone out there had an experience where going from 1 to 2 was easier than 0 to 1. And I'd love for you to just share what your experience was and why you felt that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two children with quite a significant age gap. So my son, he is 8, and my daughter just turned 1 2 weeks ago. So pretty, not an average age gap, I guess you could say. But we did have a couple of hurdles, I guess is putting it lightly, when my daughter was born. But I guess to kind of set the scene, my son was born at 40 weeks or 40 weeks in a couple of days. And it wasn't the smoothest of labors, but it definitely wasn't worst. It was just really long, couple of minor complications that meant that we had to stay at the hospital for a couple of days. I think he was in the special care unit for about 5 days. Ultimately, he was perfectly fine. We got to go home together, so that was great. I got to stay for those days while he was still there. Unfortunately, though, I will say that his post-birth experience for me was so much worse than my daughter's. And it kind of sounds a little bit funny when you hear in the context of my daughter's birth and the weeks after my daughter's birth, because they were definitely significantly more dramatic than his were. So my daughter was born at 34 weeks and 6 days. So she was a premature baby. And that was after a pretty long slog of complications throughout pregnancy. I actually had a surgery while I was pregnant with her. I had to have my gallbladder removed because it was getting really dangerous for it to.
Oh wow,
stay.
we're missing gallbladder twins.
We are twins. Yeah, so that obviously is not what you want to hear.
Wow, to go through that during pregnancy, I cannot imagine.
Yeah, it was stressful and scary. I didn't know really what that would entail. It turns out it was apparently not super common, but it's something that they can do relatively safely. So that was at 27 weeks. And from there, my pregnancy just kind of got worse and worse. So my gallbladder was removed. I stopped working. So I was really lucky that I worked for a company that was able to support that. So I was just on bed rest that whole time. However, over the coming weeks after that, I started having issues with my heart and my heart rate. So I couldn't do things like brush my teeth without my heart rate going through the roof. So I'd be sitting at about 170, 180, and it just would never kind of come down.
Wow.
It would reach 200 if I was walking from room to room. It was pretty intense. So about a week before she was born, I had my regular OB checkup. I walked in and she's like, I can't send you home. So I ended up being admitted onto the cardiology ward for them to monitor me, do a whole bunch of tests, try and figure out what was going on. And so my OB was able to visit me every single day. She would monitor me, and some of the midwives would come up throughout the day just to check on the baby. So we knew the baby was okay. But she suddenly decided that she knew how to fix my heart, and the answer to that was to just start coming out. And then I was getting ready, and I was like, I need to tell my husband. My husband doesn't know. My husband is at home. So I grabbed the phone, and because I think he was getting my son ready for bed or something. And so he had it on speakerphone, and he's like, hi, how are you? I was like, we're having a baby. And then I hear my son in the background go, oh my God, we're having a baby. He did luckily make it in just in time. I was already numbed on the table. They had me. They're like, oh, where is he? So I was tracking him on Find My Phone. I'm he's 600 meters away, which was pretty hectic. And yeah, so he walked in, and that was all fine. And despite all of that, the actual birth of my daughter was a lot more of a positive experience than the birth of my son.
Even though the birth of your son was a quicker, easier labor.
Correct. Yeah, and he was on time, all of that.
So probably the biggest reason that I was drawn to your story and that I wanted to bring you onto the podcast is because naturally, as anyone listening might hear, you're telling the story of a very easy, simple birth with your son, your first, and then a very complicated, stressful surgical procedure prior, and then a crazy C-section that your husband almost missed with your second, your daughter. Yet you are still saying that the experience of transitioning from 0 to 1 kids versus 1 to 2 was harder. What are some of the reasons that you feel in terms of your family life and just that transition from being, no kids to 1 felt so much harder than this?
Yeah, there are definitely a couple of reasons why, and I was actually chatting to my husband about this, and we thought it was interesting as well. I guess from a relationship standpoint, so between me and my husband, we really did find that the playfulness and the joy came back, I guess you could say. Not that you completely lose it, but the second time around, you're not as overwhelmed with all of this new information. Obviously, you've got now 2 children, and that is a lot of work. I'm not saying that it's not going to be a lot of work, but it's work that you already know how to do. It's work that you have done hopefully successfully before. Obviously, different family dynamics, you could have a different partner, but in our situation, same partner. So we were already had a really well established, I guess, routine. We knew how to work. We also knew what things, I guess, would be quote unquote triggering for our partners. And so you naturally step in, or you might be more inclined to help out in this scenario or do things a little bit differently just because you know that it will be easier on the other person. And because of that, there is just like a weight that's just not there the second time. You're not feeling like, well, I never felt like I was in this alone the second time. Whereas the first time, not because my partner wasn't a doting father and he didn't want to help or anything like that, but because I was a new mum. And I think a lot of new mums probably fall into this trap where we just automatically feel like we need to be the ones to do everything, or we are the ones that do everything right. And so our husbands might, or our partners, whoever it may be, might have a different way of doing things where we're like, no, it's quicker if I do it. I can make the baby stop crying a lot faster if I just do it. You know, that old trap that we kind of all do fall into, I would say. Whereas the second time around, I would say that we didn't have that. And I think that kind of takes away a whole lot of like little bickering, little silly things that you might say to people or to your partner in the heat of the moment. None of that was there.
Do you think that's because your husband had gone through it the first time and you maybe knew that he was, quote, more equipped the second time?
I don't think that it was ever a skill thing, or me thinking that he couldn't do things. I think that it was all me in my head. I think so. After my son was born, I definitely struggled a lot more with my mental health. I isolated myself from all of my friends pretty much. And in some ways didn't necessarily recover from that for a couple of years. And it was all just because I was the first person in my friend group. I was actually pretty young, even by today's standards. I was 26 when I had my son, 25, 26. So well and truly not in the same, I guess, stage of life as any of my friends. So I didn't know anybody that had a small baby and things like that. So my mental health definitely deteriorated. I became incredibly anxious. And it took me a long time to recognize that, or to even, I guess, admit it to myself. And I don't know if I ever felt like I was failing or anything like that. I just think I didn't know and I didn't realize. I thought, okay, well, this new baby's come along. This must just be how I have to operate or who I am now as a mother. And it just wasn't true. Whereas the second time around, we had a stressful birth. And then a part of the story I didn't even get to was after we got to go home, a week later, my daughter got really, really sick. And it ended up being pretty intense. They ran some tests, and one of her organs was in danger of failing. So they gave her medicine really quick. We were readmitted. We actually had to get transferred to a bigger hospital. It was a whole rigmarole. But in that scenario, had that have been my first child, I truly, truly don't think that I would have trusted my gut. Because I think with your first child, half of the mental load that you deal with is going, is this normal? Is this in my head? Am I being pedantic or am I overreacting? All of that. And it's those voices in your head are so loud. Whereas the second time around, for some reason, my gut instinct was just screaming at me that this baby was sick and that she needed help really fast. And it turns out she did. And if I hadn't trusted that instinct, and if my husband hadn't been like, yep, great, let's go in, she wouldn't be here today. She absolutely wouldn't be here today, which is a horrible thing to think about. But also, hopefully people can hear that story and take some positivity from it, in that the second time around, you already trust those instincts. And we all know a mother's instinct is pretty strong.
Everything, yes.
Yeah, it is. It ends up being the most important thing. And for us to have gone through that and then reflected back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like incredible. Like these instincts that we have as mothers, and how big of a difference that makes the second time around with keeping you calm, keeping you knowing exactly what to do and when you need to seek help. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, one other part of your story that I think is unique and that I think will probably be different from a lot of our other listeners is the age gap between your kids. Because, as you know, I'm pregnant now with my second, and my son Milo is going to be almost 3, not quite 3, but 2 3/4 when this baby girl comes. And so I'm so curious if you feel like what maybe made your transition easier from when you went from 1 to 2, if that was made easier by the fact that you had a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old and you weren't dealing with 2 babies at once. And I'm curious if you can try to imagine if your son had been 2 or 1.5 or 3 when this baby girl came, if you think you would have had the same experience, or if you think that's, totally irrelevant.
So yes, there were things that absolutely were made easier. However, there were things that were made a lot trickier. My son was in school, so we had to navigate getting him to and from school. Like, he had a whole life that still had to continue while we
Right.
were going in and out of hospital. He didn't need me like a baby needs you, but he needed me on a whole different level. Like, he needed the emotional support, but he also carried around, as much as we tried to shield him from the, I guess, medical side, particularly surrounding me. When I was in hospital before my daughter was born, there was one day, and this is hard for me to kind of, I guess, revisit, just because you never want to hear this come out of your child's mouth. But there was one day where he came to visit, and he didn't want to leave, and we couldn't figure out why, because he was not having fun. He was grumpy. He didn't want to sit, he's 8. He doesn't want to sit in a hospital room. That's not exciting.
Right.
There's nothing fun for him to do. But he also refused to leave, and it took us a while to get out of him why. And he said, no, if I leave, mommy might die. And that's a whole thing that you never want to have to ever have to deal with a child. But
Right.
that's something that you don't need to deal with when you've got a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, because you can shield them a lot better. And it wasn't like, at no point did we say, it was going to get anywhere near that level. Like, mummy was in hospital because they're making sure that mummy is fine. She's okay. She's in the safest place she could be. But it doesn't really work that way when you've got an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, because they have a whole other world experience, and they know what a hospital is, and they do know, life and death. They're navigating those kinds of ideas in their own head. So there are elements that, yes, it was easier. I will say that I think being so sick during like the start of my pregnancy, so much easier when you've got a 7 or 8-year-old that can get themselves a snack, or that
Yes.
you don't need to change any nappies or anything. Like, you can kind of lay on the couch, and they can watch their TV shows, and everything's fine and dandy. Everyone's safe. Nobody's trying to get into anything. That absolutely was easier. But as far as bringing the baby into the world, I wouldn't necessarily say it was easier. I think the challenges were just different.
You're so right. And it's one of those things that, hearing you reply to that question, which, thank you for being so articulate, it's the type of reply that I, as a parent of a 2.5-year-old, couldn't have even pictured. Like, you're talking about stages and ages that are way past where I'm at. And the only thing on my mind right now is changing diapers and him wanting to dance and watch Moana, and me saying I can't, and him kind of getting it, kind of not.
Yeah.
But you're so right about the way you can shield a baby or a toddler from all the scary stuff that's happening, and the way you just kind of can't hide that from a real kid. And so that's a really interesting perspective. So thank you for sharing that.
That's okay.
I think really my final takeaway from your story that I'm hoping people hear, because of course everyone's story is going to be different. Everyone has these extreme extenuating circumstances in one way or another. So no one's maybe going to hear a story that's exactly their situation. But I just think the big takeaway from yours that should just be kind of pleasing to second-time parents across the board is, even if your second pregnancy and your second labor and delivery and just that whole experience is worse than the first, and if you have a traumatic birth or a baby that has to be in the NICU, and there are all the reasons why that experience might be harder, sometimes it still is easier than that initial transition of going from 0 to 1. And that's just a really interesting perspective. And I'm so grateful you came on the show. Thank you, Tash.
That's okay. No worries. Thank you for having me.
I feel like I already recapped my takeaway from that interview at the end there, but I found this chat particularly interesting because of the large age gap between her two kids and because of all the reasons that you would think that she would actually have the opposite experience but didn't. Okay, our last caller here who agrees that going from 0 to 1 was the harder jump. Hi, Ashley. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
Good. So you're deep in the 2 stage right now.
Mm-hmm.
And according to your application letter, you felt like transitioning into being a mom of 2 was a lot easier than that initial transition of going from 0 to 1. Can you just
Definitely.
take us back to your first baby, your first postpartum, and what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. So, first baby, I had a scheduled C-section. So, everything leading up to it was very predictable in terms of that schedule. But then baby was here. I spent 2 nights in the hospital. And my first night at home, I'll never forget. I finally got a second to like go into the shower and I could not catch my breath. I was sobbing. I was just like, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. And it just all hit me at once. And
What was it that you were feeling in that time?
I remember being really nervous that the nurses weren't with me anymore. I was like,
Just you're on your own at home.
yeah, I was like, if it's not me, it's my husband with the baby. And neither of us know what we're doing with this tiny baby that 3 days ago didn't exist. So I remember thinking like, they're the nurses' names. So I was like, I need them right now. And knowing that as soon as I got out of the shower, I'd have to go feed her again. And then the feedings were so hard at first. And it felt like that was my whole entire life was feeding this baby, trying to sleep myself, and then my poor husband waking me up to feed the baby again. And
Oh,
that was
no.
just this fog that lasted. The first week was definitely like the hardest. I showed up to my 2-week OB check and she was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "No, actually, I'm not."
Wait, interesting. You had I guess that's because you had a C-section.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have an OB check till maybe 6 weeks.
Yes. So thank goodness I had a 2-week check because I really needed help. I needed a lactation consultant, and I needed to hear from my doctor that, like, yeah, you're having a harder time. Like, it's okay. Let me write you another prescription for the pain meds. And I'm like, okay, like, good. This isn't exactly how it should be going. So
Yep.
having her eyes on me was really helpful that 2 weeks.
And how long would you say you felt this way after your
Um,
first?
Probably the first 2 weeks. By the 6-week check, like the just regular postpartum check, I went back and my OB, she was like, "You look like a totally different person." I was like, "I feel like a totally different person." So by 6 weeks, I had left that fog and felt like, okay, I'm not totally consumed by the feelings of like, oh my gosh, this is all I'm doing. What am I doing? So yeah, by 6 weeks.
And then your second comes along, or
Mhm.
your second pregnancy comes along, and
Mhm.
you have a similar delivery, another
Yep.
C-section.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then what happens here?
Yeah, so it's the same thing, another scheduled C-section. And so we had their 2 nights at the hospital. From the get-go, she did spend 1 night in the NICU. So, and it was interesting because since it was my second, I was like, okay, things don't go as planned. That's fine. Take her. We're good. And so we settled in and were sent home that third day. And it just was like night and day difference where I guess I knew that I had to get up and moving. I also knew the feelings were to be expected. It wasn't like, "Ah, like ouch, everything hurts." It's like, "Okay, this is how I can prevent this pain from happening. I know how to manage my own body now." That was the
Mhm.
strange thing with the first is that everything was just foreign to me. But this time it was like, "Okay, I remember this." Kind of like muscle memory, I guess. And I just in my 2-week check this time, I wrote in that I was literally cleaning my bathroom right before we went in because I just had like, I guess my nesting instinct just took over and I was like, I gotta keep moving. I gotta do this. And like, it wasn't as, like I said, jarring to go from the hospital to the house. Like the house already. I already was a mom. I already had a baby. I had already recovered from a C-section. So I just knew the routine a little bit differently, a little bit better.
And what's their age gap?
They are 19 months apart.
Okay, so that was a relatively quick post-birth pregnancy.
Yes, so everything was fresh on my mind.
Yes, and I'm assuming that when you came home the second time, if you're deep cleaning 2 weeks later before this appointment, were there no shower tears the second time?
No shower tears the second time. I'm trying to think those first few days. I mean, the exhaustion where you're waking up in the middle of the night, but it wasn't just like the panic of that first baby, like true panic where you're like, I'm in over my head.
One thing that's interesting that some people might say is, people that feel like going from 1 to 2 is a lot easier, they probably really knew they wanted to, and they probably felt like they were just so excited to have a second and build their family. Maybe they even want more than 2 and they're just kind of on the road. But you wrote something very interesting in your application.
Yeah.
Can you share what you said?
Yeah. Last summer when my daughter, she was almost 1, and so she had her personality, she was walking, she was a lot of fun, and my husband and I really were like, maybe she's it. Like maybe we just have one baby, an only child. And I started looking into it, and I'm like, I think we could do this. And so we had that discussion and we kind of pumped the brakes, but then found out I was already pregnant. And we were like, well, that makes the decision for us, because truly we knew we wanted to give our baby a sibling, and we both have siblings, and that just is such a special, important relationship. So realistically, we knew we were headed that way, but maybe not as soon as we had planned. But yeah, it was a little bit like, oh yeah, okay, we're doing it.
So it's just proof that even people that maybe aren't even trying for a second or don't even know for sure that they want a second, that the experience can still be way easier of a transition for you.
Definitely.
I want to discuss a little bit, we've talked about the identity loss and kind of more of the emotional and mental side of going from 0 to 1, and then how that differs the second time around. But what about the physical side and the not physical like recovering from your C-section, but just the amount of work that goes into having 2 versus 1?
Yeah, I think we had a conversation before we had our second where it was just the understanding that the newborn would be my little shadow, and then my husband would really take over duties with the toddler. And physically for that, it was also nice with the C-section, because my doctor told me, you can only lift this baby. You can't even lift the car seat. And so my husband really, that was a nice clear boundary for him where he's like, okay, I have got to put the toddler in and out of the crib. I've got to get her dressed, do diapers, where I could do all the things with the newborn. We just got into our little routine where I would put her into the car seat while he was putting the toddler into the car, and then he'd come back and get the car seat. And it's just these little routines, these little dances, until I got the okay from my doctor at the 6 weeks to officially be able to not have any physical restrictions.
And it does kind of sound like your counter argument to that, in terms of the routine being so difficult with 2, is sort of that the actual newborn routine with your second is just so much easier, which you can't disentangle from the fact that it's because mentally you've been here before.
Yeah, definitely.
I saw you wrote about just how the first time around you were kind of paralyzed by decision fatigue and Googling every little symptom. Did you really feel like by the time the second baby came, you were just like, they're going to be fine. Everything's good.
Yeah, I did. And the little decisions, like you don't know what you don't know. And I think the first was a good practice in that. Like you think like trying to find the answers online isn't going to prepare you for when you're actually with your baby. And I just kept trying to maybe fill the anxiety that I had with like an answer. Like I can find the answer. Let me just keep looking and looking and looking. But then this time I'm like, this baby is brand new. Everything's
Right.
new about her. Like, the answer isn't online, and we're just going to go appointment to appointment with our pediatrician and take it as it comes versus trying to, I guess, get ahead of it.
I think one thing I'm learning from these conversations is that you're always going to be a first-time parent to your first.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll always be a second-time parent to your second.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really, it would be easy to say, if I felt the way I felt having my second when I had my first, then the experience would be a breeze because I would know everything and I would only have one baby to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
But no one gets that experience because whenever you have your first and it is your first,
Mm-hmm.
even though your physical load is lighter and there's 2 parents to 1 baby, you just don't know as much. And there's so much paralyzing fear and stress and anxiety, not for everyone, but for a lot of people. And by the time their second comes, they're maybe like, what? How was I stressed with one? Like I only had 1 baby, but it's because it was your first and that's always going to be your first.
Yeah. And I feel like the first baby, there was a lot of work on myself, like my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh, baby, you're brand new, but I'm a brand new mom too. Like, I don't know. And you don't know. And like, but we're going to figure it out together. Like, there's a big sense of like, we're doing this together. With the second baby, though, it's different. It's not better or worse, but it's just different because I'm like, okay, I've settled into myself as a mom and just as Ashley again. Like, I feel like a version of me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been kind of cool because now I feel like she is like my little buddy. I'm like, okay, I've figured I'm not such a mess, but let's figure it out too.
It's almost like you now got to get on board with our family. You just joined the train instead of our family like literally building the tracks.
Exactly. Like, the only real thing to figure out is just her place in it versus everyone's place in the new family dynamic. So it's been fun. It's been way easier than I thought it would be, honestly.
Well, this is good news for me. Very exciting, very hopeful. So thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on. I'm hoping and praying my experience is similar.
Yes, me too.
First of all, I loved hearing from someone who only thought that they were going to have 1 child and then still, even though they got pregnant kind of by accident, still felt like transitioning to 2 kids was the easier jump. And also, I loved bringing on someone that had such a small age gap between their kids because it contrasts with the caller right before who had such a large age gap, and it kind of proves that it's not the age gap in any way that makes someone feel a certain way. All in all, I think that these 6 interviews are all at least somewhat fitting with my theory, but I would really love to hear your thoughts on the matter. And if you have a personal story that contradicts my theory, we would love to hear it. So please comment down below in the comment section on social media. You can head over to the Real Stuff Pod on Instagram. You can go to @LucieBFink on Instagram. You can comment down below on the YouTube video and leave us a message and let us know what you thought of this. And let us know if you want me to do more audience episodes like this, where we bring on multiple people and kind of have a roundtable crowdsourced episode. If you're liking listening to the Real Stuff podcast and you leave it a 5-star rating and review on Apple or Spotify, please take a screenshot of it and send it to me in a DM. I would love to send you a personalized voice note back as a thank you. It means the world to me that you would take time to do that because it really helps the show be seen and found by more people. And we will see you next week on our lovely podcast. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Real Stuff. I'm Lucie Fink. Don't forget to follow the show on social media @The Real Stuff Pod. And if you're liking these episodes, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a written review. It helps the show so much. And if you're feeling called to come on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. We'll see you next week for another intimate conversation on The Real Stuff.